Um, well, for those who don't know me, I'm David Parker, and I'm the Executive Director of the Man Asian Literary Prize, and it gives me very great pleasure on behalf of the prize to welcome you to this shortlist announcement of the 6th Asian Literary Prize. Actually, it's not all that long ago that we announced the long list for this year's prize. And in fact, looking around the room, I see people who sort of seem to be almost in the same position as they were about 4 weeks ago when we did this. It's rather a déjà vu experience. Anyway, that gap between the announcement of the long list and tonight, which is just over 4 weeks, very conveniently takes in the winter break, the Christmas and New Year break. That is, I suppose, for those of us who actually get a break. And it's a very convenient time to be, in fact, reading the long list of the prize. And some of us who have the time can actually start to do that, and I've been doing that. And I've managed to read all, I think, but 3. And those 3 I've kind of skimmed here and there, so I have a bit of an idea of them. And actually, I'm cheating a little bit because I had actually read 3 when they were more or less when they first arrived in the office. I took them off the shelves from Marina and took them home and read them. So, in fact, I've now read most of them, I can say. And I have to say that as I was reading them, I had the following impression. As I came to the end of at least 10 books, I felt to myself, this one really has to be on the shortlist. And actually, I know I'm not alone there, because we have a thing, I don't know whether you've heard of this, Maya, but we've had a thing called the Shadow Man Asian Literary Prize Jury. Some bloggers around the world who've been reading the long list, and they have reported exactly the same impression, that this is a formidable long list. Now, in fact, we've given the Maya and the judges instructions this year that the shortlist can only be 5 novels for various reasons. So from this, I think about 3 things are very, very clear. The first is that probably this is the most distinguished long list that we have had so far. And therefore, the second thing is that some very fine books are not going to make it onto the shortlist, which Maya's about to announce. And I think that really leads me to my final point, which is my segue to you, Maya, which is I really don't envy you the job that you must have had moving from 15 books to 5. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Maya Jaggi, Dr. Maya Jaggi, who is the chair of the judges of the Man Asian Literary Prize, to read to us the shortlist of the 2012 prize. Thank you very much, Maya.
Thank you. And also, good morning from London. But without further ado, I'm going to read out first the shortlist of 5 novels for the 2012 Man Asian Literary Prize, and then tell you a little about each of them. Between Clay and Dust by Musharraf Ali Farooqi of Pakistan, published by Aleph Book Company. The Briefcase by Hiromi Kawakami of Japan, translated from the Japanese by Alison Markin Powell, published by Counterpoint Press. Silent House by Orhan Pamuk of Turkey, translated from the Turkish by Robert Finn, published by Alfred A. Knopf. The Garden of Evening Mists by Tan Twan of Malaysia, published by Myrmidon Books. And Narcopolis by Jeet Thayil of India, published by Faber and Faber. Set in a decaying inner city after the partition of India, Between Clay and Dust by Musharraf Ali Farooqi is an elegiac but unromanticized evocation of a dying culture. The tragedy of a champion wrestler challenged by his younger brother and befriended by an aging courtesan has a mythic resonance as the character's ethical codes collide with the values of a new world. Farooqi's tale is more moving for the spareness and restraint with which it is told. In The Briefcase by Hiromi Kawakami, the ambiguous relationship between an office worker nearing 40 and her former literature teacher, a retired widower, is traced with astonishing delicacy and humour, as painterly gestures evoke passing time through the changing seasons. From their chance meeting in a bar, the solitary drinkers, 30 years apart in age, discover a common language in food and its rituals until the unspoken catches them and the reader by stealth. Centered on a decrepit mansion at a Turkish seaside resort on the eve of a military coup, Orhan Pamuk's Silent House is both a dark family saga and a brilliant comic satire on a nation's drive for modernity, which hints at the dangerous social rifts that such a process can create. Interior monologues with great technical virtuosity expose the fantasies and neuroses of characters ranging from a devout widow to westernized rich kids and an ultra-nationalist teenager. But parody is balanced by pathos in a novel that 30 years after its original publication still casts light on its subject. With its heart in the traumatic aftermath of the Japanese occupation of Malaya, The Garden of Evening Mists by Twan, a far-ranging and intricately layered novel, unearths beauty and atrocity within buried histories. A retired Straits Chinese judge in Malaysia, the sole survivor of a Japanese prison camp, recalls her fraught apprenticeship during the insurgency against British rule to a Japanese landscape artist who was once gardener to the emperor. In her feat of memory, the novel becomes a profound exploration of personal and national honor, guilt and complicity, what it means to atone, and what it takes to forgive. Narcopolis, the poet Jeet Thayil's remarkable fictional debut, begins with a single hallucinatory sentence stretching over 6.5 pages, viewing the world through an opium haze. In Narcopolis, set in an old Bombay underworld of gangsters and eunuchs, pimps and pushers, with an interlude following the pipe back to Mao's China, the opium den is revealed as a microcosm of a city in transformation, where opium is seeding ground to heroin, and the pipe itself is a teller of tales. This is a stylistic tour de force with great originality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the Q&A, I'm going to hand over to Harrison Kelly, who...
Hello, Maya.
Hello. Morning.
Happy New Year. Nice to see you again.
I can, yes.
We're just going to take a few questions. If anybody has any straight off that they would like to ask Maya about the shortlist. Yeah? Perhaps you might want to come up to the mic. That might help.
Hi Maya, it's Marisha here
Hello.
from Peony Literacy. Hi, hello. What was the most difficult thing in choosing the shortlist as compared to the long list? What were the issues that cropped up when it must have been so hard to do? So what were the things that were kind of most discussed amongst the judges when you came down to these last 5 books?
Well, you're right, it was extremely difficult, and we're very proud of our long list, really, and commend that to everyone to perhaps second guess us. But what I think the process is that rather than looking for what we're all seeking in the best novel, what we mean by originality and so on, and resonance and all the other things that you might be looking for, the process is actually one of discussion of each book in turn, and that's really how you eliminate on the basis of flaws and perhaps structural or other problems in some of the books that we really admired. But we were looking for something, I suppose, as near flawless as possible. One of the things that had come up, and came up to a lesser extent again this time, but in the initial process for the long list, was translation, trying not to second guess. I mean, we can't be aware of the original books in all these different languages, but there is a way of telling if a translation is obviously bad or is perhaps underpowered, which may also have been a problem in some of the cases. But other than that, I mean, we're not really being prescriptive about what we're looking for. I think that's very important, to keep an open mind and see the books on their own terms. So
okay, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is there any other questions? Perhaps I could ask you one about the shortlist. When they came through, quite a few of the names on the shortlist are recognised names. They've been listed for other prizes before. But one thing that struck me was the fact that many of these writers have never been put side by side in this kind of context, in an Asian context before. I wonder if that changed the way that you viewed many of these writers, all the way from Istanbul to Tokyo. You know, Jeet, Thayil and Twan were up for the Man Booker Prize, but they've never been put together in an Asian context. I wonder if you could talk about how that influenced your decision, if at all.
Well, first of all, I think Asian writers are world-class, so it's not really surprising that there would be some overlap with other prizes. I don't think seeing them in an Asian context did influence our decision at all. I mean, we weren't considering them in terms of nationality or national balance or Asianness. I think it was probably more evident in the long list, the kind of commonalities there were in some of the themes of people coping with vertiginous change and following really individuals in fiction who are doing this in different ways, migrating, moving within countries, going to cities, going to different countries altogether, and all coping simply with change within their own societies. But in this, when we come to look at the shortlist afterwards, rather than it's having been part of our deliberations, I think you can see a few commonalities in the sense. I mean, one thing about 3 of the books on this shortlist is that you can see Asian writers of a new generation returning to the past in a different way. And that applies to Between Clay and Dust, The Garden of Evening Mists, and Narcopolis. They're all younger writers who are looking not simply at the history of their own nations, but at regional history, and perhaps questioning it in a way that's not been present in the sort of post-national generation in the same way. And I think that's one of the most important things. I mean, for example, if you look at Between Clay and Dust, it's neither set in India nor Pakistan. It's not evident where it is. It's talking about a culture that was shared and arguably still is shared across a national border, and in a way which I think the prose reflects that it's a very austere, courtly kind of English. These are 3 books written in English, which is another interesting point about this. And similarly, Narcopolis, there's also, again, a sense of the arrival of brash commercial values and the loss of an earlier culture that was flawed but also had its virtues. And the other book that I was grouping just for the purpose of this was Twan Eng's, and looking really not simply at the Second World War, at Japanese war crimes in Southeast Asia, but making leaps of comparison both to the post-independence or just pre-independence period in Malaysia, and the Boer War, the British rule in South Africa. So it's really a different kind of outlook on national histories and regional histories, and linking it to all kinds of international strands. Beyond that, I'm not sure that I would want to generalize about Asian writing or these Asian writers on our shortlist. But I think it's very important to put them in this context, because the prize is doing something that neither the Booker Prize nor other prizes do. The Man Booker Prize, which is limited to books published in the UK, whereas this is very definitely a prize that for books that could be published anywhere in the world, and is by nationality, so that we have some books which were not published, to my knowledge, in the UK, and some in the US as well. So that's and it's also it admits translation. Perhaps that's another answer to your question, is that one of the most important ways this prize refigures writers is that there's for a long time been a kind of discontent among some writers about being classed as Commonwealth writers. There's obviously a reason to see writers in the context of the English language and to look at them together. But there's an equally compelling reason to look at Asian writers alongside their peers who write in different languages. We can only do that collectively through English translation. But one of the hopes is that this will encourage translation into other languages, other Asian and other languages. And that Asian writers will be read across the continent as well as outside it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I just ask a question? You would be aware of a lot of discussion about the fact that, for example, 2 of these books have already been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and another thing that's often brought up is the fact that Silent House was published a long time ago originally, and there's also been discussion of the fact that Pamuk himself has been heavily involved in a move to make certain aspects of Turkish literature be seen as European literature, and so there are a lot of conversations. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of conversations going on outside the sort of, the purely literary attention that you're wanting to give to your task, and I'm wondering how can you? Is it possible really to shut out the kind of thoughts about, is it wise to, for example, shortlist books that have already been shortlisted by other major prizes, or is it wise to shortlist a book that may be very controversial firstly because it was published so long ago originally, and secondly because it could be thought to run counter to Pamuk's own, should we say, politics of writing. So there are all these discussions, potential discussions, and other discussions that you can imagine going on outside the task as you've set it. And I'm wondering, is it possible ever to escape that kind of conversation and just pay attention purely to the task in hand?
Well, I think the short answer to that is yes, that it is possible to do that. And that's what we did, because actually when you're talking, I must commend my fellow judges, Vikram Chandra and Monique Trong, because not only are they wonderful writers, but they're wonderful readers. So it was a sheer pleasure to discuss books in depth with the other members of the jury. And once you start doing that, you're not really considering all the factors that we may or may not be aware of, that you were mentioning, Dave. But as far as I mean, to take some of those points, yes, there is a Nobel laureate on this shortlist. There have been previous laureates. Certainly, Kenzaburo Oe was on the shortlist in 2010 of the same award. It doesn't necessarily mean that they'll win. I mean, this is a prize for a novel and not for an oeuvre or for a lifetime's achievement, which is a very different matter. It's a novel, the Pamuk, that was published 30 years ago. It was his second novel, I believe, and obviously has only just been translated. But like the others, and there were other second novels that were on the long list and I think are on the short list, we looked at each on its own merits. And the fact, I mean, it is remarkable, in fact, that this book written 30 years ago still spoke to us and still spoke about some very present issues to do with the way individuals experience the drive for modernity and rapid modernization. Particularly in Turkey's case, it's a post-imperial country, post-Ottoman country, with a sense of defeat and a drive to catch up. But this, like all novels, this is about how individuals experience that. And it shed a great deal of light on kinds of nationalism and kinds of national neuroses and so on that we thought certainly spoke to today. And that's one of the reasons that we shortlisted it. I think in terms of books being on other shortlists, again, there was no move, there is no rule to disqualify writers from this prize or the shortlist because they've been shortlisted elsewhere. That's really the merits of the writers and that have been recognized elsewhere in the world. But it's very important, I think, to recognize that this prize does something different, which is what I was talking about, by putting them alongside other writers. And also primarily aiming not simply that these writers should come to the attention of Western readers, but that they should come to the attention of other Asian readers and different countries and be translated within Asia. I think if you, it's a little aside from your the question, but it is one of the considerations I was thinking about in terms of the importance of this prize and the way it picks up books and has them disseminated across the continent. That you could compare it, for example, to the Latin American literary boom of the 60s and 70s and how important that was. That was the first time that Latin American novels, because they were published during dictatorships, they were published in Spain, in Barcelona. That was the first time that Latin Americans were reading each other's literatures. And that had a huge stimulus on younger writers and future generations of writers, not simply reading French and British and Spanish literature, but reading each other. You could say that could happen out of this prize as well. But again, these are considerations around it. There are things that I thought of only looking at the long list and the short lists, rather than there being part of our deliberations, which, as I say, were really shutting all of this out and looking at the books themselves, even those that we admired very much, but we found flawed in some way.
If there's no further questions, then thank you very much for that, Maya. We look forward to welcoming you to Hong Kong in just a couple of months' time, and the shortlisted writers as well for the winner to be announced. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I look forward to doing it.
And I just quickly say thank you, Maya, for your wonderful exposition of each of those writers, and also for the wonderful way in which you answered those questions, which I think gave us a very rich understanding of some of the great possibilities of this prize. I think that was truly wonderful, and I'm going to study this video very carefully. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.